public. Yes, they are.
Yeah.
But it's certainly correct that
Yep.
The council, it goes out to consultation, there are hearings, and we can make changes before we make the
final decision.
Right.
I haven't had a chance to look at this thoroughly. It's been raised with me, and I understand that at an earlier review, the advice given to councillors then was that everybody had to be at the hearings every minute they were being held. I haven't been able to find yet anywhere based in statute for that. As I've said to Mary and Jenny, my feeling is that it's the same as the situation that we have with long-term plans, where if someone has to be away from the hearing for an hour or two, that's fine, they can come back, as provided they're brought up to date with what's been said in their absence and they're given any written material that's been provided.
Well, this is the joy of live streaming. We can actually catch up with things.
Yes,
but,
exactly. Yes.
But I think we'll take proper advice on that. So
Yes,
we'll take your considered advice on it.
Yes.
It was certainly what we'd understood was that we had to be there for the lot. And the other thing is that once we then publish the final, as it were, it isn't the final. People have an opportunity to object, and at that point, the objections are heard by the Local Government Commission, and they would travel here for those objections to be heard. Right, good. Paul?
It's like Andrew, I'd like to test a theory too on the amendment. And hearing the commentary around that's not really what you heard through the consultation. I can't actually see, and you may be able to enlighten me, how it is any different. The fact is you're still going to have a single councillor per ward, but when it comes to the community boards, those multi-wards come together as one. So you still have effective representation from a single councillor. They actually come together as a single community board with 2 or 3 councillors, which also begs the question if, let's say, one councillor is away or sick and there's some important stuff out in the community need to be handled by a councillor, the other councillors, as that multi-ward come together, could actually go and assist. So just,
That is not what's in the amendment. So the amendment is clearly saying one councillor per ward. It's not saying...
No, it's just one elected councillor per ward, but you've got the multi-ward being the community.
Yes, that one's saying multi. The amendment saying multi councillors per ward. So it's not them coming together. I think you described it as still one councillor per ward and then them coming together for community boards. Yeah. No, well, this one's saying that a number of councillors are elected for the ward.
Yeah, so instead of one councillor for coastal, one councillor for, because we're going to combine that with Hallswell now, aren't we? And one councillor for Spraydon, you would have 3 councillors for Spraydon, Hallswell and coastal. So it's, I mean, I'm only joking about the combinations, but yeah. But the point is that that's the comparison. So what Jamie's proposing is an amendment. So instead of having one per different ones, let me see if I can find a combination that's actually real.
So if you went for Spraydon, Woolston and Cashmere and had 3 councillors elected for there, you could have all councillors coming from Cashmere.
Yeah. So Riccarton, Hornby, Hallswell. So under the proposal that we have, there would be one councillor for Riccarton. You don't have to be living in the ward that you stand in. You just have to notify that in your disclosure. So Riccarton 1, Hornby 1 and Hallswell 1 compared to 3 to represent Riccarton, Hornby, Hallswell.
That's all.
Yep, that's the difference. Questions? Yep, Yanni? Oh, sorry, Phil, look, I did acknowledge Phil and then I ignored him.
That can't do. Okay. Look, again, thank you so much for a huge amount of work. Andrew Turner asked the question before about in relation to how the amendment perhaps hasn't fitted the previous report. But I want to ask something quite specifically around that too, and it's really in terms of its relationship with the Local Electoral Act. So it's really in what, and I will probably ask Councillor Goff this too, to in relation to his amendment to justify it. But it's really in what way does this amendment here, in what way is it aligned with the Local Electoral Act? I guess I'm thinking in what you've made some reference already to like community of interest and commonalities, but I'm just wondering if you could clarify that.
So the Local Electoral Act, and you would have seen in the report on the 14th, that came the 14th of May, the Local Electoral Act requires that Council consider effective representation for communities of interest. The guidelines put out by the Commission said that the first step is to identify your communities of interest and then to identify how you effectively represent them. So that pre-consultation identified communities of interest and then identified that from the feedback the most effective way of representing them was the proposal that was put up, one councillor per community of interest.
But presumably Auckland meets that test. Yeah, so, yeah, I know it's different legislation, but one can assume that, well, is it different legislation when it comes to the Local Electoral Act?
Their boards are in
No, they've got boards, but that's a separate issue.
But they still have to meet the requirement of effective community.
That's right, even for the councillors. And they've
So
got that.
my second question, I've got two other questions, please.
Can I answer Phil's question?
Sure.
As well? Only if you want me to, you mentioned me.
Would you like?
When it's appropriate, yeah, it's fine. Go ahead.
It aligns in the same way as it does now. You have two councillors for Spraid and Heathcote and have done since 2000, of which obviously you and Tim are the councillors, and I'm proposing effectively the status.
So really my next question is in relation to that sort of thing. And like I think, Mary, you might have referred to to the like socio-economic factors, in fact, how they can be influence the voting. And like, for example, and you referred to the wards, the ward, Spaden combined ward that Tim Scandrett and myself represent. And clearly that is an example where, in fact, Spraid and Heathcote wise, the two councillors live in the one ward. And I accept that. So I just wondered in terms of that occurring, if this amendment is supported, you've got a table on page 240 with the combinations of the community boards and wards and how they would be, I guess. I just wonder if you could, besides the Cashmere one, where in fact, when we look at that, I would have thought potentially, besides Woolston missing out in terms of voter turnout and lower socioeconomic status, that possibly Spaden would too. But I just wonder if you might comment on the other combined wards and any areas that, in fact, potentially, because of those voter issues, may actually miss out on having a councillor being elected from their community of interest or their smaller ward.
It's difficult to hypothesise about. So all we can relay back is what some community boards or some community meetings suggested to us. So and that was concerns around Fendleton Waimari area, or that Fendleton Harewood Maclean's potential area. If you combine that, you may get dominated by the Fendleton area as opposed to the other areas. That came up at one meeting. Was it raised? No, it was certainly raised in Spraid and Heathcote area, the concern about Spraden not being represented.
But the issue doesn't have to be resolved by anecdote. There is evidence that actually highlights this, which are called the electoral returns. Yeah. And if you look at the electoral returns, then you will find that to stand, and it's the easy comparison is when there were 24 wards and that they were unceremoniously jammed together the wrong way, because it did actually mean that you put in a high voter turnout ward with a low voter turnout ward, and I'll use Burwood Pegasus because it's the one that I knew very well. Burwood Pegasus was just two representatives from Burwood. You needed to have an equivalent turnout in Pegasus to even run run the slight, sort of possibility of winning one of those seats. And it wasn't until one of the incumbents actually retired that that changed with an exceptional candidate, as I recall at the time, and that certainly broke the mould. But the truth is that if you didn't win the support of Burwood, you didn't win the seat.
That's right. And that was in some of the background information that was sent out about that history and it was the same happened in Spraden Heathcote, I believe, and some other areas. So the information in the data both nationally and internationally supports what Councillor Clearwater was saying, is that if you match people, you get low voter turnout areas with no representation.
In fact, the interesting point, and I think it is worth reflecting on, is that the council at the time, the recommendation that they put to the out for public notification was actually a 16 ward model, which is interesting that if we chose the 16 ward model today, then that would actually reflect exactly the position that the Christchurch City Council got to in 2004.
I think it was 4.
Yeah.
Chrissy's here.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
And I've got one other question. It's really when I look at the map, attachment 2 on I was looking at the 14, but I could equally look at the map on, it should be attachment 3, with the 16 ward model. So if I look at the proposed ward area there of Cashmere and Wilson, Spraden for 1, it just seems to me that if this amendment is supported, that in fact it's almost like heading towards voting at large, and would that have potential to actually lower the voting turnout as well?
Based on the research that Dr. Jean Drage presented to you, yes, it could potentially lower voter turnout.
Now, I might add that nearly all the workshops we had, but particularly in the Hallsville, Hornby and Riccarton areas and in the Linwood area, most citizens there talked about this, and they talked about it in terms of wanting to know their councillor as well, and so they wanted their councillor to possibly live as near as possible to them. But they were also concerned that you would get a cluster like somebody said in Hornby. What does the person living in Upper Riccarton know or care about Hornby? They said about Wigram, I think they said. So that's certainly something that's in the minds of people that came along to the discussions.
Paul?
That's an interesting point you just made there about what would someone from one suburb say about the next suburb, and you could actually apply that to anywhere in Christchurch. What would people in Maryvale know about what's happening in Fenelton? So that argument could be applied across right down to the small mesh blocks, really, couldn't it?
Tim and then Jimmy.
First of all, thank you to Yanni and the staff for the immense work that you've done on this, and the feedback's certainly very, very good. Just concerned about some of the terminology with regards to, saying that some of the areas won't a lack of representation. As a council, I know my ward extremely well. I've lived in every suburb that starts with S, including Addington, etc. So although I live in Cashmere now, I do know it extremely well. So, however, and you do it all through it. But I guess when we go through and we're getting the feedback from the community through the hearings, etc., whether we go for 16 or 14 or whether we're going for, as on page 238, where we've got, say, the 16 ward model with regards to each ward itemised, so you've got 16 wards and 16 councillors, or over the page which Phil pointed out before at page 240, whether you've got some with 3 and one with 1, we're going to get that feedback from the community which we represent. And although we will come up with something that we support here today, the key is to get the feedback. And as Yanni had said, the feedback was very strong, and as you also said, about the numbers that people want.
The most critical thing is that council does reach a decision that you can go out to consultation on. That is our biggest risk, is that if you don't meet the statute requirements, it's a serious breach. So you do have to make a decision that can go to consultation, and you can, at the end of consultation, amend and change.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Question, Yanni and then Jimmy. Sorry, I did call Jimmy first, but look, Yanni, you ask your question first and then I'll come to Jimmy.
I really wanted to understand from the proposed amendment how it meets the guidelines from the Local Government Commission, the 2014 guidelines, in terms of determining effective representation of communities' interest and how those factors actually would be applied across the 5-ward model. I guess what I'm trying to understand is we've been through those tests with the other 3 options, but we haven't for the 5-ward. So can we get whether the person moving it or whether staff can provide advice as to how those factors have been considered in that? And I just want to make the point for councillors that there are new guidelines. So despite what's happened previously, the 2014 guidelines are new and do require a different kind of thinking of local wards compared to what possibly was done last time.
Is that right? Are there new guidelines? Are there new guidelines?
Yes, there are. The Commission has issued new guidelines, and they were the ones that were attached to the May.
Yeah, so
of May
how do they
report.
differ from the previous guidelines? Just the main difference.
There's not considerable difference, really, apart from, they do step through the same 3-step process: identify communities of interest, identify effective representation for community interest, and then consider fair representation. So it's not a significant
And that was the
change.
way it was when these wards that we currently have were approved.
Very similar.
Very similar.
Yep.
And very quickly, just to that, the subdivisions would meet the guidelines of the grassroots representation for the communities of interest. That's not being proposed to be abolished. The community board would be elected by the subdivisions. So on the 14th, or actually, I'll use the 16 ward model as an example because you moved it. So, for instance, Spraden, Woolston, Cashmere, 2 community board members from Spraden, 2 from Woolston, 2 from Cashmere. This proposal simply says instead of 1 councillor, it would be 3 councillors for that wider ward, because the oath you take as a councillor is different than the oath you take.
What I'm trying to understand, I understand it for community boards,
Yep.
but the guidelines that we take into account when we factor through what the wards should be are for council wards as well as community board wards. And for the council wards, there's some quite clear guidelines as to the consideration. And I'm really struggling to understand how 5 actually meets those when you look at Brookhaven, Brookhaven going all the way up to Brooklands, for example, in the ward.
They would have their representation through the subdivisions.
But not at a council level.
And community board one that mirrors it. I've answered the question, I'm just going to go in circles.
Yeah. Anyway, that's, I guess, a debating matter. So, Jimmy, and then there's all these questions, right? Okay, Ali, and then Glenn.
Quickly, 3 questions. The first one regarding the number of community board for the relevant associate, the 3 options, the single council ward. What's the rationale? If we review this information, if the 14, the single council ward, have 8 community board, 49 community board members, but if increase to the 16 single council ward council, reduced to 7 community board, 40 community board members, but option 3 not put in here, it's a supplementary. If 19, the community board, then increase up to the 8 community board and the 46 the community board members. I don't know what's the rationale. My question is if you have 8 community board, 14 the single council, then you increase to the 16 council, but reduce one community board. That's reasonable. But regard to 19 councillor, but you still increase the one community board.
So that,
7 to 8, I don't know this logic,
right.
rationale.
So that was all around trying to configure made sense. So in the 14 model, it was pulling those wards into what was a configuration that appeared to be an effective arrangement for those wards, and that's the number of community boards. That turned out with 16, it was more appropriate and more effective to cluster them into 7 wards, and for the 19 model, it was clustering them in. So it was actually about trying to pull the wards together into what are a better community of interest for a community board. So that's how the different configurations of numbers of community boards were worked out.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Second question is regarding to the cost. For instance, like on page 242 in here, each unit cost $34,000 for 40 board members. This $34,000 is for the operation cost for each ward or for each board members.
So the $34,000 is what is the new remuneration authorities' allowance or salary for a community board member plus their direct costs. The 348 is for the running of the whole community board.
Okay.
So that is so that's all the secretariat, the facilities, secretariat, advertising, support staff, etc. So 34,000 is the cost per community board member. 348 is to run a whole community board.
Okay, thank you. Last question. Regarding to this amendment, I'm not sure maybe Jamie can answer my question or not. I'm not sure. Based on this amendment, my question is how to, to fit in those, the numbers. Because while if 14 single council, the ward, we have 8 community board. So if this one, I'm not sure how to fit in. Or if 16, we have 7 community board. So how come to become the 5 for each ward is 3 councillor plus only 1 single councillor? How to fit in?
I will try. Disregard the numbers, Jimmy, for the councillors because it's irrelevant. And the simplest way to say it is that there is no change to the numbers at all. It is simply how the councillors are elected in that ward. So under the 14 ward model, for example, in Riccarton, Hornby, Hornsville as they call it, which is your ward, under the 14 ward model, it's the same story for both of them, but it recommends that you have 1 councillor for Riccarton, 1 for Hornby, 1 for Hornsville. For the community boards, there were 3 community board members for Riccarton, 3 community board members for Hornby, 3 for Hornsville. It says that a councillor would effectively run each of those subdivisions, then join up for the wider ward at the end of it to make 3 in total. What this proposes under that model is to simply say that, well, the community board members would still run in respective subdivisions, Riccarton, Hornby, that the councillors running 3 would be elected within the whole community.
I understand, but my particular concern that if the 14, single council ward, because you calculate is 5 ward, each one is for the 3 councillor, am I right? It's 3, plus 1 single, plus 1 3. But in here, how to calculate, 236.
It's a shame they won't see this here, but Central Wilston, that would consider that. 2. Where that is just 1.
So this only 1.
Banks Peninsula is just 1, whatever way you slice it. All this is just saying is that the subdivisions are irrelevant for councillors because they would have an overarching ward role whereby the number proposed, be it 2 or 4 or whatever model it is, that they are simply each ward, not for the subdivisions like the community board members. Same price, no difference to that. It doesn't alter anything. It's just how it's made up.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.